Hi, I'm Dr. Hansa Bhargava, Chief Medical Officer of Medscape Education. I'm excited today to talk about a very important issue, treatment-resistant depression. And we have a wonderful expert here today, Dr. Scott Aaronson. Dr. Aaronson, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Aaronson, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm sure the audience would be very interested.
My current title is I'm the Chief Science Officer for the Institute for Advanced Diagnostics and Therapeutics at Sheppard Pratt in Baltimore, Maryland. And the Institute is really devoted to providing both expert clinical care as well as research expertise for people with difficult to treat disorders. My own specialty has been in difficult to treat mood and anxiety disorders.
Wonderful. So as we start this, could you give us a little bit of perspective or lay down the landscape of treatment-resistant depression and mood disorders, just so we have an understanding of, the percentages and numbers of this as it affects our patients?
Well, so when you look at the incidence of depression, we're looking at an illness that pretty much touches everybody in the world, either themselves or someone they care about. So we're looking at something that probably has a lifetime risk of 20%. It may even be more than 20%. Of those folks with depression, easily a third of them do not respond to currently available treatments. And one of the problems with the treatments for depression is we have been trapped in providing novel agents that all do the same thing. So we have lots and lots of different agents that work on serotonin or norepinephrine, which are only two of probably dozens of neurotransmitters that may have some effect on mood or anxiety disorders.
And, a third is a large number. It really is, and I know that you've done a lot of work in this area. What are some of the innovative methods that you feel could be effective for those patients?
I did not expect to become a device guy, but what happened is when I first got down to Sheppard Pratt in 2001, there were really no real out-of-the-box novel agents for depression, and was asked to take over as a site for vagus nerve stimulation trials, as well as for trials on transcranial magnetic stimulation, and found I could begin to treat people that had not been made better by the existing agents. And that now has led into becoming very interested in psychedelics as being yet another novel approach to deal with folks that we have not been able to help.
So tell us a little bit about psychedelics for the clinician who's seeing patients. What is it that would be really interesting for them to know, and how quickly will they need to adapt this in their practice if the research and evidence shows that it works?
So there are two different main paths right now. One path is looking at MDMA, also known as ecstasy, that's been handled by a group called MAPS, which is a nonprofit organization that has been devoted, God bless them, for 35 years to try to get access to MDMA for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. So not exactly depression, but there's a huge overlap. And many of the folks with difficult to treat depression actually have comorbid post-traumatic stress disorder. So the first to get to the FDA will be as early potentially as next year. MAPS is finishing up their second of two required phase 3 clinical trials. And my understanding is that their results continue to look as good as their first study, which was published within the past year. That'll be followed. So we're about to start the phase 3 trial of a synthetic psilocybin, COMP360, for difficult to treat depression, in which we're looking specifically at folks who failed at least 2 treatments and up to 4 treatments in the current episode. And that'll be a phase 3 trial that'll be starting probably in the fall of this year, with a target probably of getting to the FDA by 2025. So we're looking at things that will become available in the next couple of years and really will require all of us to get our arms around this new treatment paradigm, because it doesn't look like the existing treatment paradigms.
Dr. Aaronson, typically and historically, a lot of physicians and clinicians have been slow to adopt treatments that are innovative, even if they're FDA approved and even if they have evidence. How would you address that issue and speak to your colleagues about that issue?
Part of the problem that psychedelics are going to have is we have a lot of misinformation out there. There's a quote that has been attributed to Mark Twain as well as Will Rogers, but it's one of my favorite quotes, which is, "What you don't know won't hurt you nearly so much as what you know for sure that just ain't so." And there's a lot of my colleagues that know a lot about psychedelics, and it just isn't so. We're not finding that these are addictive or abusable drugs. And if anything, considering all the work I've done over 40 years doing clinical research, this is some of the safest intervention I've ever had. Not only is it that, but it's really one of the first times that we're looking at combining psychotherapy with pharmacotherapy. And in fact, I don't think that psychedelics are antidepressants. What I think they are is they are vectors that allow change, but the change only takes place within the context of a psychotherapy devoted to helping our participants understand what psychological features may have been contributing to their depression for months or years.
That's very interesting. So it's almost removing the blocks so that the psychotherapy can actually be more beneficial.
It really is very much that way. And I really suggest to my colleagues to start talking to the folks in the field, to start talking to those of us who are doing research. I serve on a lot of different boards for organizations and trying to make sure that we're getting a lot of expertise on board to talk about these things, because there's another huge problem, which is that there's a whole bunch of folks with their own agenda who are going to try to talk to us about psychedelics, despite a real absence of any research understanding or understanding about the serious psychiatric illness that we're talking about treating with this means.
Before we finish off the interview, is there anything else you'd like the clinicians, our audience to know about these innovations that you are working on?
Please be careful where you're getting your information from. You're better off getting your information from scientists and not necessarily from journalists or from charlatans or shamans. And do be prepared, because this is coming, and the experience many of us who are working in the field have is this will be here, and we're so delighted that there will be lots of folks that we can make better that we really haven't been able to touch with some of our existing treatments.
Such an important message. Listen to the data, listen to the science, especially in the era of misinformation. Thank you so much, Dr. Aaronson. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited today to talk about an important issue, treatment-resistant depression. And we have a wonderful expert here, Dr. Steve Levine, to speak to us about it. Thank you for being here, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about your background before we get started?
Happy to. I am the Senior Vice President of Patient Access and Medical Affairs for Compass Pathways. I'm a psychiatrist by training and subspecialty trained, fellowship trained in psycho-oncology. Prior to Compass, I had spent 10 years as founder and chief medical officer of a national mental health services company that specialized in treatment-resistant depression. And I'm currently also the co-founder and non-executive chairman of a mental health services company based in Texas that specializes in treatment-resistant depression.
Great. So let's talk about treatment-resistant depression. Can you give us a little bit of background context about it, how prevalent the issue is, and what are the urgent issues around it?
Treatment-resistant depression is a major depressive episode that has not responded to at least 2 treatments of adequate dose and duration. This does represent millions of people. If we consider that 17 to 20 million adult Americans every year suffer with major depressive disorder, about half of them actually are able to access treatment, but at least a third of them would likely be considered treatment resistant. This is several million people. Fortunately, we're in a position now where the existing antidepressants that we have do serve millions of people. People, are able to benefit from currently available depression treatments, but with a third of them considered treatment resistant, there remains this huge gap and huge burden with this major unmet need. And this affects patients, their caregivers, their healthcare providers, the healthcare system, and society at large. And if we consider what may be behind this major unmet need, or why there is such a treatment gap, as part of that definition of a treatment of adequate dose and duration, that means that patients have to stay on these antidepressant treatments on a typically daily basis for several weeks, if not months. And existing treatments often can be difficult to tolerate, or it's just difficult for patients to stick with treatments that they have to take every day. So tolerability may be one consideration there. Also, most of the antidepressants that we currently have available have fairly similar mechanisms of action. And so even if somebody has tried multiple antidepressant treatments and may feel like they may not benefit from anything, it may more likely be that they are somebody who may just not respond to that type of mechanism. And unfortunately, in the past several decades, we've seen fairly little innovation in the development of new mechanisms and new treatments. And that's one of the reasons why we have an opportunity right now to develop new treatments that work in new ways, really through new paradigms, which hopefully can meet the needs of those who are not currently well served with available options.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is a very large segment of the population that are suffering. And, that is why it's really important to do this work. And I'd love to hear about some of the work you are doing in these innovative types of treatments for this disease.
Yeah, at Compass Pathways, we are a mental health care company dedicated to accelerating patient access to evidence-based innovation in mental health. And we are currently conducting clinical trials around a potentially paradigm-shifting new therapy, which is COMP360 psilocybin therapy. This is our proprietary formulation of psilocybin, a synthetic version of a compound that can be found in nature derived from mushrooms. But ours is a proprietary synthetic formulation manufactured to GMP standards. And we combine our COMP360 psilocybin with a model of psychological support. And this is also supported by technology. And we are developing this through clinical trials, through a regulatory pathway for an initial indication of treatment-resistant depression, for which we received breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA in 2018. And also for additional indications, including PTSD, as well as anorexia nervosa. And last year, we completed the largest ever randomized controlled double-blind trial of COMP360 psilocybin therapy, or frankly, the largest trial of psilocybin therapy ever. That was 233 participants in 22 sites in 10 countries in North America and Europe. And that demonstrated the rapid and sustained benefit of a high dose of COMP360 psilocybin therapy relative to a low dose following a single administration.
Excellent. For the research that you just talked about, what are the side effects? Were there any side effects? And is there also adjunctive therapy needed, for example, psychotherapy or other forms of behavioral therapy along with the medicine?
One of the really compelling and innovative aspects of our model is that this is not just a drug and not a drug that people take at home without any context around it, but rather this is administered in a controlled medical setting with therapists who are specially trained in a model to support patients receiving this therapy. That means that this is a much more comprehensive model, even though it's only delivered one time within our phase 2 trial. And what we've been able to see is that this really is a new approach to a disease that really has been lacking for innovation. In terms of the safety, within our phase 2b trial, we saw that the majority of side effects were mild to moderate. They primarily occurred on the day of treatment or the day following. The most common side effects were things like headache, nausea, or fatigue. There were some instances of serious adverse events, which would be suicidal thinking or behavior, but those occurred weeks following the administration of the treatment for those who hadn't benefited from treatment.
So in terms of innovation, any type of innovation in medicine, in healthcare, sometimes we get challenged by the adaptation of the new therapy or treatment, even though there might be evidence and FDA approval. How do you think you or anybody else can overcome that challenge?
It's a really important question. Merely receiving FDA approval for a new therapy does not mean that that treatment will be available to patients, that they'll be able to access it. There's considerations of multiple other stakeholders, including payers, and they need to understand the value of the new therapy and be willing to reimburse this to healthcare providers. There are the healthcare providers and health systems themselves, and the infrastructure required and the training required for them to implement a new therapy. There are patients and their caregivers who need to understand a new treatment and a new approach and feel comfortable with that. And that means that we have a lot of work to do along with running our clinical trials in terms of understanding the needs of all of these stakeholders, generating the evidence required to answer the questions that they have, and educating all of these stakeholders about such a new approach and helping to allay any concerns that they have, demonstrating value, and helping them to understand how this potentially can fit into our existing healthcare system.
Do you think that education can be used as a tool to increase awareness?
I think it's crucial. If we think about treatment-resistant depression itself, this is not necessarily a concept that's very, very familiar to healthcare providers, even psychiatrists. They tend to think of their patients as having major depression, and when their patients aren't benefiting from treatment, they will try successive lines of therapy, but there's not necessarily a bright line point where they start to conceptualize their patients as having treatment-resistant depression. And that can make it difficult for them to really identify who are the right patients for a treatment that is specifically approved for that indication. There also aren't clear guidelines for the approach to patients with treatment-resistant depression. And therefore, we see a really heterogeneous approach with patients really receiving a very, very broad array of therapies, some of which have more evidence to support their prescription than others. And so education on the front end of how do we identify who are treatment-resistant depression patients and who is appropriate for a new therapy is extremely important. And then, again, with this being such a different approach, this really is a new paradigm, which is very exciting, but comes with the challenges of educating providers on how will therapists be trained in this model to support patients appropriately. What kinds of administrative challenges might they face as far as reimbursement or setting up space to deliver this in a safe and appropriate way? And so as we progress over the next couple of years towards hopefully achieving regulatory approval, There are a lot of opportunities to educate providers on treatment-resistant depression and a new mechanism and a new approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is, it's only the beginning. Fortunately, of course, to have these innovative treatments, but we definitely want people to know about it from all of the people that you named. One last question for you, Dr. Levine. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of these innovations that are happening, in terms of the clinical trials that you're working on right now for our audience?
I'd just like to highlight that there has been a lot of excitement around the promise of the development of psilocybin therapy and psychedelic therapies more broadly. And that excitement paired with, I think, the recognition broadly that there are big unmet needs in the approach to depression and treatment-resistant depression has caused many to perhaps move beyond the currently available evidence and currently available science to think about how can we get these treatments to patients immediately. And I would caution providers and patients alike to try to be patient and for us to be able to generate the data to answer still unanswered questions about how we can deliver these therapies safely, who can benefit, who may not benefit, to highlight any additional safety concerns before really rolling new treatments out in an untested way. There currently are other pathways being explored, especially at the state level through decriminalization and legalization. But we at Compass Pathways are firmly committed to a medical model and a regulatory approach because we believe that is the most likely pathway for broad and equitable patient access should we demonstrate through our trials that this is a safe and efficacious treatment.
Such an important point. It's just, paying attention to the data, making sure there's procedures and policy around it, and most importantly, making sure the patients and the communities are safe. Thank you so much, Dr. Levine.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.